Hello and welcome to Critical Line Item. My name's Tom Ravlic. Thank you for joining me for this particular podcast. One of the great challenges people have had over the past several months in Australia generally has been contemplating whether to take the vaccine for coronavirus or not. There's been some vaccine hesitancy expressed by a range of people. Other people have been queuing up for up to 6 hours to get the jab. Now, one of the interesting tweets I saw recently was from Professor Gemma Carey from the University of New South Wales. Now, Gemma's got an interesting story to tell in that she's got some health issues that make life very interesting for her. And she's also had the jab, and and there were some consequences to it, but things seem okay at the moment. She'll tell us more about that and other things as we progress. Gemma, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Now, look, before we begin, there may be those who listen to this who don't know your background. So what would your career look like on the back of an envelope?
So I'm a policy researcher. I'm a professor at UNSW, as you said, and director of Centre for Social Impact there. And then because one career wasn't enough, I decided to go and grow another one. And I'm also a memoirist. So I have a book called No Matter Our Wreckage, and I also write for places like The Guardian from a kind of with my non-academic hat on, my lived experience hat on.
That's great. Look, before I ask you this question, I'll preface it with I was born with a chronic illness. Chronic illnesses don't stop you from achieving things. They may slow you down a bit. What are the challenges in life that you've had with your health prior to taking the COVID vax? How do you explain that to people?
So in 2012, I got the flu, and my immune system killed the flu, and it kept going, and it attacked my nervous system. So I got this disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is actually COVID causes that. So that's becoming a bit more common. It used to be rarer before COVID. But what it means is that your body kind of shreds all of the protective material off of your nerves. So I lost use of my arms and legs for a period of time, had vast amounts of very bad pain and chronic pain. And I spent about 5 years in rehab, getting to a point where I could walk and use my arms as normal again. I never made it fully back, but I got about 80% of the way there.
How does it translate into what you're able to do? Do an example where you can share in terms of the flexibility or the motor skills. Well, how does it translate into something?
Yeah, look, it's one of those things that I think invisible and changeable chronic illness or disability is hard for people to understand, because there will be times that you'll see me and you'll think, she looks really fit and healthy, and I'm hiking up a mountain. But I can't go into a loud space because noise causes pain for me. There's a lot of things I can do that other people can't do. Like I can swim a kilometre freestyle. Lots of people can't do that. But I'm not allowed to run. And my handwriting is terrible because my fine motor skills never quite came back in my hands. So you get this kind of funny mixed bag of high functioning and then sort of parts of your life where you have lost pieces of things that you used to do.
But it's kind of interesting where things are no longer as normal as they might have been. Something else compensates, right?
Yeah.
But it takes a while to work out what's compensating for the thing lost complete flexibility or complete use of.
Indeed. Yeah. And you're always sort of working out the boundaries, I think, of what your body can do, because it's triggered an underlying problem that's never going to resolve. And that can look different depending on how, if I've caught a cold or if I'm under stress. So day to day, I think if people don't have an underlying health condition, they might not realize that you're actually kind of doing this mental math as the day goes on about how much have I put my body through. Does that mean that I can do this nighttime activity, or do I need to actually go and make myself rest so I don't get a pain flare up? So yeah, it's like maths in the back of your mind all day, each day.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I've got what they call hypoparathyroidism. It's a rare condition. I didn't speak to somebody with that condition. I've had it since birth, and it took me 43 years to actually speak to somebody else with the disorder. Okay. So when you talk to somebody else with the same disorder, you've got this checklist of symptoms, and you're going, oh, is this do you get tingling around your face for points in time? And you get tetany. You used to, but occasionally twitches in the muscles, but nothing bad. So you're actually swapping notes with people who understand what you go through. The rest of the world might think, oh, there's somebody you're a bit dorky or a bit different, or you don't go out a lot. Why? Whereas you're right. If you make the mistake of not taking an active vitamin D3 capsule in the morning, you will know about it by mid-afternoon, and you may need to self-medicate with a couple of teaspoons of coffee just to make sure you're fighting the fatigue away.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, I'll probably need a coffee reasonably soon. However, and yes, I did take my supplements. Now, what happened in your case when you were contemplating to take advantage of a vaccination for COVID? How was that process? Because you've got a list of things you worry about on a day-by-day basis.
So I fell into the 1B category. So I was eligible for Pfizer and AstraZeneca. And I'm a researcher, public health researcher. So I did a lot of my own research on the vaccines. I talked to my specialists. I really gathered as much information as you can gather about, something we don't yet know that much about. I decided to get the AstraZeneca vaccine for a number of different reasons. So firstly, I decided to get vaccinated because I am high risk, and if I got COVID, it would be devastating for my body, and I'm not sure if I'd survive it. So it was important to me to get vaccinated as a high risk person. And I got AstraZeneca because it's closer to the flu vaccine, and I tolerate the flu vaccine really well without a problem. So, and whereas Pfizer is a bit more of an unknown technology. But it was really, I think, for people in a high risk group, you're kind of presented with three bad options. One is don't get vaccinated and risk getting COVID, and that's really not going to end well. Take AstraZeneca, and there is the risk of blood clots. It's very small. It wasn't actually something I was particularly concerned about, but it's still a brand new vaccine. Or take Pfizer, which is a completely new technology. So you're kind of weighing up, well, out of these three options, which one is actually going to hurt me the least, knowing that all three are going to cause me a problem.
You landed on AstraZeneca?
I landed on AstraZeneca, yes. So do you want to know the story of what happened?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. So I had expected I'd have a pain flare, kind of like what happens when I get a cold, where I'll get nerve pain in my hands and stuff, and it'll knock me around for a few days. So I was ready for that. I'd taken time off work. And I did get the flu-y symptoms. So I had the vaccine at 4 p.m. on Monday, and by 11 a.m. I was in an ambulance. the next day. So what happened was I developed a lot of pain through my body, and I got a terrible blinding headache, and it was unresponsive to Panadol and to codeine, and that's on the list when you get AstraZeneca as a blood clot warning. So my dear husband said, right, we've got to do something, but I was in so much pain I couldn't talk or move, so we had to get an ambulance.
Yeah.
And the ambulance had to shoot me out with fentanyl, so I at that point could talk and explain what was actually happening. And I presented to emergency, unable to talk because of pain and with non-responsive pupils, but not showing the other signs of blood clot. So a confusing case for them. What actually happened was that every small nerve fiber in my body became inflamed. So there was some kind of there's an underlying tendency towards nerve inflammation left over from having Guillain-Barré syndrome, and AstraZeneca shot it through the roof. So my pupils couldn't respond because all the nerves in my pupils were inflamed. Whereas in my hand, like the nerve, it presented in my hands as pain and in my body as pain. So I was doing different things in different places. So I spent 4 days in acute care, getting the pain under control. And I'm out of acute care. I'm two weeks and 1 day post-vaccine, and I am still on a very strong cocktail of drugs to manage what's happened. And I genuinely don't know how long this period is going to go on for. It could be weeks, it could be months. I'm really hoping it's not years again.
Okay. Your story is very unique.
It is. I do like to be different.
As is mine when I talk to people about stuff. But in hindsight, you don't regret the decision to take the vaccine, do you?
I do not regret it. A lot of people have said to me, oh, you should have had Pfizer. But there's no way to know that Pfizer wouldn't have done exactly the same thing or something worse, because we don't have any evidence on, tiny subgroups of the population like me or like you who have rare disorders.
I've got no idea what, see, I understand why some extended members of the family were carrying on last year about having to be locked down. I sat down and said, what are the odds of me actually surviving COVID? Can anybody tell me? I've got a rare disorder. Nobody can tell me anything. Yeah. So the only solution is find a way of operating as much as you can without going out into the big wide world. Until you're confident enough with the medical advice and other things. I mean, that's where I landed.
Yeah.
Rightly or wrongly.
Yeah. And that's kind of, that's why I got vaccinated was, well, am I going to spend the rest of my life living inside my home? Am I ever going to see my sister who lives in America again? Not getting vaccinated didn't seem like a choice, even though, my GP did say to me, you're going to have a reaction, maybe you shouldn't be vaccinated. But we don't have herd immunity. We've got low vaccination rates. It felt too risky to me not to be vaccinated against something that is, without a doubt, going to be catastrophic for me if I get it.
There's another, there's a flip side to that, and that is those of us that have got rare chronic conditions, irrespective of the point of life in which we get them, are actively thinking about how this stuff impacts on us. How do you then give people a message who are relatively healthy, who are still toying with the idea of waiting around and not having the vaccine?
I think it's really tricky, and in some ways I find it frustrating, and it's a bit confusing to me, because if you're healthy, why wouldn't you get the vaccine? The blood clots are less risky than taking non-steroidals. They're less risky than paracetamol, which is the leading cause of liver failure in the world. You've seen a lot of comparison with a contraceptive pill. If there is a vaccine that exists against a virus that can kill you, I can't understand why you would hesitate for even a minute about taking it. Yeah.
Yeah, the other complication, and then given that your area of research is sort of public health and the implications of things in society, I wonder whether you've got any thoughts about the role played by sort of Twitter and other social media platforms where I guess conspiracy theorists have been muddying the waters in terms of the public health message. And have you had a look at that in some of your reading of late?
Look, I know that is an issue, but I actually think with the case of AstraZeneca, it's probably a secondary issue to poor communication out of government itself.
Okay.
The chopping, the changing around the messages. I think that the Morrison government made a lot more fear around AstraZeneca by changing its stance on it so many times, and that sort of confusing messaging of you shouldn't have it, but you can opt into it. Clear, simple public health messaging is really important, and I think they fundamentally failed at that. And I think that people have interpreted the blood clot risk as being much, much higher than it actually is because of that messaging. The other thing about the blood clots as well is we can detect it and we can treat it. So when I presented to emergency with some of the symptoms of the blood clots, the first thing they did was take a blood test of my platelets. And because in the AstraZeneca blood clot syndrome, your platelets will drop. So they could tell very quickly that I didn't have blood clots because my platelets were normal. If I had blood clots, we actually have treatments for it. So even the blood clots are less dangerous than COVID itself, which I don't think people perhaps realise.
Gemma, I get where you're coming from. The other thing about the current period is it's also there's a certain level of fear of the unknown, I think, to the extent to which people are capable of comprehending, how to make a decision where you're deciding what is riskier or what poses less risk than taking what poses less risk. There's a bit of an issue with extreme risk aversion.
I think so. I think people probably genuinely don't realise that there is a section of society of people like me who actually are advised to never get vaccines. That I imagine that hasn't ever crossed the mind of a healthy person because until you live it, you don't know it. Mm-hmm. For when healthy people don't get vaccines, it forces people who aren't meant to get vaccines into a position of having to take what is actually a much bigger risk for us, which is getting vaccinated against best medical advice. And I think people perhaps aren't thinking about the vaccine in a kind of societal level way. It's become very individualized risk. And as you're saying, perhaps, struggling to weigh up the risk because I suppose we are relatively safe from COVID here. But what's happened in Melbourne, shows that at any moment there can be an outbreak. And if you have a serious underlying condition, that outbreak, it's life or death. But if we had a good herd immunity, there would be people who would be able to not get a vaccine who aren't meant to have them and could avoid, very serious adverse reactions like what I experienced.
Yeah. Look, I think you've made the message quite clear. And it's probably a convenient segue uh, into a close of the conversation because um, possibly not necessarily selfishness per se, but people are looking at their own bubble of activity, what they can and cannot do right now. We can't jump on planes and go overseas and do the usual thing that they might do at a particular time of year, etc. Um, so that's a good message to leave people with. Now, you've done a lot of work in the with the Centre for Social Impact, and you've done some other things as well. Where can people find your stuff?
Oh, a bit all over the place. So my research is primarily on the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Okay.
And then as I said, I wrote a book. It's called No Matter Our Wreckage. It's a memoir.
Yep.
The best way to find me is probably actually just to Google my name or to go on Twitter because it's a little bit dispersed out there. It's GEMCAREY on Twitter, or you just Google Gemma Carey and everything will come up.
Sometimes you don't know whether that's good or bad when it comes to a Google search, do you?
Indeed. Yes, no, everyone can find out an awful lot about me from a Google search, so go for your life.
Look, Gemma, thank you so much for sharing your experience with me and those who will pick the podcast up and listen to it. I do hope people take your message seriously because it's an important one. Thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure.